I thought I would give us all a little break from, well, this journey. And this book is one that, well, it's a fascinating story. And it's one that if you'd like to have a copy of it, I have a PDF. Just simply email me and I will get it into your hands. Because what you're going to find out is that this is going to be fun. It really is. It's a fun story. It's one of those stories that it's set in so much realism that you're going to find it maybe somewhat hard to distinguish between what is real and what is not. What is just a fanciful penmanship of a writer, or is this in fact a witness report? What we do know is that Mr. Drury failed on his promise, which left for Mr. Lloyd to fulfill the promise that brought this remarkable story to us today. I hope you enjoy my little presentation. And again, if you want a copy of it, email me and I'll get one into your hands. You're going to enjoy this. Etidorpha. What a story. Documenting, I don't know if this is a will and testament, if this is a confession, or if this is in fact nothing more than a fanciful bunch of words. But no matter what the story is, it causes every reader to, well, consider quite a few things. And I can tell you this, for those of you, and I can't say which one you are, but for those of you who I believe this story is a vibration for you, you're going to enjoy this. So, the man who started it all. It is said that with great wisdom comes great sorrow. Hasn't that been true? We know now that there is an ancient knowledge that has been lost. If it can ever be found, not sure. But this ancient knowledge, as it seems, has been preserved in many cases. The great proverb that is written, wisdom is folly to the fool, and knowledge a stumbling block to the uninitiated. How true of words have been written for our species. And indeed, sadly, more and more are becoming less initiated. There are stories with the stories of the garden, with the stories of the first amoeba, to the story that the real planet, the real people, the real species are the ones that live under the earth. We're the outcast. Well, hard to think of it that way, but true. Legends have been written about entrances that could lead to this inner world. Many speculations of historians, philosophers, even theologians, to the reality that there is, in fact, another world underneath ours. Maps have been drawn that give us apparently some insight to these entrances. And stories have always been around that, well, there is yet a more superior race. They are the guardians. They're the ones who have overlooked us, meaning humanity. They're the ones who have helped us restart at least 3 different times, or so the legend goes. But kid yourself not. There very well could be such a place. A whole world advanced where we should have been. We've had 6,000 years and we've failed. There's something apparently wrong in our genetic makeup that prevents us from ever ascending beyond the baseline of where we've been for nearly 6,000 years. It is said that these people will never show themselves to us. We're not worthy enough to be in their presence. It is said by some of the writings that the outlanders, us, we have a terrible smell about us. That those of the pure race, the pure beings that live inside the earth, are the ones who are, in fact, the caretakers. Now, whether these stories are true or not, I'm not here to say one way or the other. As I said, this was a wonderful book. It's going to cause you to open your mind or cause you to shut it tighter. Mankind still has so much to learn and so much to unlearn about our very planet, of which we know very little of. We are not the beginning, and we are not the end. We are merely a fragment that will be placed in its rightful place in history. It was great hope for us at one time, but apparently it appears that humanity is doomed to relive the past, for humanity has not grown, and unfortunately, our own indictment is our very habits ourselves. So let's escape. Let's escape into a story that is one that you're going to find. I found this man. I am the man. I like him. I found I had very much in common with him. I feel sorry for him, but at the same time, I'm envious of him. How will you feel by the end of the book? Books are as tombstones made by the living for the living, but destined soon only to remind us of the dead. That's what each one of our lives are. Live your life. Prepare your mind. It will manifest differently for different people. As I said, to those that are destined, oh, are you in for a treat? So get ready. Now, it's important that you begin to think about some serious thoughts. Let's start with matter. We're all made of it. Matter is a collection of molecules. Matter in its pure state is motionless. Matter is stationary energy until friction takes place. Okay? Got it? Now consider your mind. Your mind is essentially trapped within a body called matter, substance, which is called a body. You can't operate outside of it. Well, most of us cannot. The vast majority would never venture to that precipice. But those of us who have jumped in, we know that there is yet something different. Now consider body. Your body is nothing more than a collection of molecules that are attracted to one another, being held together not through gravity, but through the cohesion of attraction of energy. Matter within itself remains at rest. There is no energy expelled by cohesion itself. When fraction between molecules of opposite polarity, matter becomes disturbed and energy is released. Our bodies are but a first step to a much brighter future. Our bodies are to be our first step in mastering the mind force. The mind force within is to gain supremacy over the matter which is body. When this is achieved, the mind becomes ready to ascend, which is spirit. And so our story begins. Our story opens up with a very normal man of the late 20th century. Our time frame is about the 1920s. And he is startled by having a white-haired man suddenly appear in his living room. Now, this man was very strange. He had the ability to almost read people's minds. He also had the ability to seem to master over the elements. His story began as he told this young man initially. Now, the young man did not know, but there was an obligation that was going to be put upon him. We'll get to that later. So our story is about this man in the late 1800s. Apparently, by most estimation, the story of where I am the man who started it all lived in Pennsylvania, it would seem. It seems like he apparently broke a solemn vow, an oath, to a very secret group of people, men in this case. Now, he paid a heavy price for that, for he had threatened publicly to tell the world of some of these much held secrets. Now, our character in focus apparently got himself into a bit of, how shall we say, financial trouble. Now, back in the days, in the late 1900s, you could go to jail for a debt. Apparently, our friend had such a thing happen. But as it turned out, it apparently was not all his fault. This was merely a ruse in which to start his journey, for he had been chosen as one of only two within a century who are chosen to be recipients of this knowledge. Now, our friend readily accepted the offer without quite thinking about it. For his kidnappers, as it turns out, were merely his custodians. When he had gotten himself out of a little pickle of being in jail, he was promptly kidnapped, covered with a gurney sack, thrown into the back of a carriage, and for a day to day and a half days' journey, he was unaware of where he was at, who his captors were. He ended up in a small cabin in the middle of the woods. It was during this time that he was given a choice. He could either go back to his family and his life and face the humiliation of what no doubt would become a ruinous scandal, or he could accept this honor of which he had been offered. Our friend in question took that honor. Probably the one, as you will read, he regretted all of his life. But no less he did. And when he did, they began to work alchemy upon him. And what was a young man in the prime of his life became an old man that no one recognized, even that of himself. Before he was to leave all behind him, his custodians granted him one wish, and that wish was, well, how shall we say, to go back to see his family, his wife, his children, his community. He was hoping that he could tell someone of who he was and of his story. Now, the character you see in the back, this is, well, more than a custodian, a caretaker. And as he watched our friend desperately try to tell the people whom he had known not less than a week before, look at him as though he had lost his mind, for they didn't recognize him. And they found him to be a person of mental stability questionable. As he left and the journey began, the guardian began to explain to him about some things. Now, the guardian was a youthful person, most likely in his early 20s. And as he began to initiate our friend into what was about to take place, our friend could not even begin to imagine. And so our story begins on this fantastic journey in the caves of Kentucky. Yes, many of you may know of the caves of Kentucky. Well, as our friend was about to take a journey that would transform him throughout all eternity, he was met by another creature. This creature was one that had water fluid dripping off of him, had no eyes, barely had a discernible nose. Our friend was about to find out that this would become his closest new friend. As they began to enter into the cave in the journey downward, they had traveled to the point where the entrance was covered by water. And as our friend looked about him and his new companion, there was one last shaft of light that shone from the surface down into the dark abyss. And our friend cried out, "Oh, to have light! Oh, to be in the warmth!" Well, it would be the last time that he would see it in his form. Now, we find out that there is many different things about our planet. We're still going to learn a lot. There are apparently openings, energy vortexes, ascensions that can be gathered, portals that can send forward, downward, upward, backwards, and beyond multidimensional. Our friend traveled for the longest time with his other companion until they got to a place. The custodian, now our friends of focus, the last vestige that he had of the surface floated away. He was now in a world that he did not know, a world that he thought he could not see. And as he learned, he has eyes, as we all do, that can see beyond the light. Now, as we go forward, you must begin to understand our friend is going to a journey of a place that you will find most fantastic. So we have to stop here and consider gravity. We only understand one strand of gravity. There exists a place where gravity works nothing like we have been taught. It acts much differently. It is subservient to other laws. When matter has reached a plane where it no longer has weight, but yet has not changed its substance. There is no force that can be exerted upon it, thus gravity is equalized. Our friend, as he began to journey deep into the earth, began to find that there were subtle changes taking place. As he began to descend into the bowels of the darkness, there was yet another light that began to manifest. And as our friend, with his new blind friend, who saw more than he could have ever had thought to see, began to explain some things about him. And in the peripheral edges of darkness, our friend began to see what appeared to be, well, how shall we say, tormented looking formations. As to whether they were souls or not, one could not tell. They continued to journey deeper and deeper and deeper. Our friend began to realize that there was a light. It was not of a single source. It was as if the photon never disintegrated, but that the photon was joined with others and emitted the natural light. Our friend with no face, well, let's say no eyes, no, if he has a face, began to communicate with our friend. Come to find out, he's highly intelligent, of a race of beings. They no longer need their eyes, for they find that the third eye sees all much clearer. He communicated with our friend initially by forced exertion, but they came to a place within the earth where the vibrations no longer carried, and telepathy was the way. Our friend came to a lake larger than any ocean, and his new guide began to explain to him some things. The first thing the guide said was to consider mind force. Humanity is destined to discover that mind force acts on pure space motion, moving itself and matter with it without any exertion of a material body. Mind force attracts by the motion of thought, matter, for matter is always seeking attraction, and thought always seeks matter. And with this understanding, not only does the mind begin to go into places it had never thought of, it now immerses itself into a new power. They began to move upon this lake that had no motion. This water was at perfect peace, perfect energy. And our friend began to realize, without him even knowing it, that they were moving very fast. Our friend reported that it came up, according to the guide, of over 900 miles an hour. Yet, the environment within the boat showed no motion at all, no evidence of any force being exerted or felt. Our friend tore off a piece of his coat and decided to do an experiment, for he was a thinker. He was a scientist, and marveled how he could throw up the piece of cloth that seemed to be motionless, and then all of a sudden was gone. Our friend comes back to Mr. Llewellyn and begins to explain to him. And now this was a series of events over a 2-year period when the man who started it all came back and had to prove to our young friend. I mean, our young friend was, in fact, a man of reason, an educated man, a man of numbers. And so he found the story credulous of our friend. But slowly but surely, he began to realize that this man had knowledge that was even beyond his comprehension. Yes, there is a knowledge, there is an understanding that has been hijacked, that has been altered, that has been, how shall we say, inverted. Now, consider your mind. When mind is free from exercising its influence on a brain and indirectly on physical matter, which is a material body, when the mind force is free of gravity that constrains matter, while in its influence, mind force will exert its action through energy on matter itself. In this space, matter is subservient to mind force. Mind thus creates a comprehensive reality, and matter will attract and attach to this reality. This mind force will create a being by the mind force alone. There are planes of consciousness and reality that exist and coexist in the same place, the same space, the same cohesion of matter itself. There is matter that is within matter, that matter that is seen and matter that is unseen. We continue back with our friend. He began to find that this lake, according to the guide, literally covered 3/4 of the planet. And within it is where the majority of all fresh water on the planet exists. Oh, I could go in and tell you more of the details, but I would be robbing from you. Now, consider matter. There is a condition that exists of a frictionless medium where only mind can exist. It is called pure mind. It is an energy that is capable of disturbing the equilibrium of matter. Here, matter is perceived as dead matter, which obeys the mind of the spiritual. Spiritless matter is subservient to the demands of the intelligence. Our friend began to see things within the earth that he could only, well, try to comprehend. For it so overwhelmed his core of what he based reality on. And as he learned, reality is subjective to that which you see. Yes. Our friend went through many, many changes. Fear, oh, we all have it. You'll experience it. Most likely in our departures on the other side. Those fears have to be dealt with. They must be put to an end. And as our friend began to learn, you cannot even trust the ground that you stand on. He found that gravity no longer has the same laws as it did on the surface. His wise friend now, that he now realizes possessed more wisdom than the God that our friend had envisioned, began to realize that we know very little of the forces that impact our lives every day. He went through a place that, well, unimaginable, fantastic. Forest of giant fungi, mushrooms, going hundreds of feet into the air, growing in a perfect environment. Colossal. He saw creatures, trees, fruits, colors. Do you know why the rainbow is limited? Because all we are seeing is white light. We're not seeing the other lights. He saw fantastic creatures, reptiles of all shapes, forms. Yet they lived in a coexistence. Now our friend came to a plant. The guide warned him not to take part of this fruit, but our friend, hard-headed as we are, decided that he didn't need to listen. Now, consider mind. Mind within itself acts on the matter of one's body to producing motion of matter and spirit within. The spirit cannot move of itself. It requires mind, which while in the body is a slave to matter. The body, however, is as well a slave to both matter and mind, for it needs mind to move it. Our friend, as he took of the fruit, began to see, well, souls that were lost. Souls lost in their perversions. Souls lost that accused people. Souls that always pointed their fingers at others. Souls that always found judgment of others, but not for themselves. Yes, there's a reckoning for each of us. And then, in the midst of his horror, as he was in a place that could only be called hell, Etidorpha came. She is what men have written is called heaven. She is what humanity knows to be as love. And our friend found out many, many secrets about both. Meanwhile, back up on the earth, our young friend is now taking information that he got from the man who started it all and finding out that the most brilliant minds that he could find in the Midwest, in this case in Columbus, Cincinnati, the universities, was that all men, regardless of their intellect, regardless of their level of understanding, still longs, oh, so forlongly, for that place of reason, that place where things just will make sense. But alas, we all know that does not exist here. What our friend also began to tell him is that, oddly enough, it is not gravity that so much controls our planet as it is electromagnetic fields. This book will teach you things. It'll teach you that gravity works, but how deep? What is gravity? Define gravity. We still cannot. Our friend continued to find out that as the deeper he went, his body began to, in essence, no longer exert motion and force. He found himself that one step could lead to hundreds of yards. He began to learn that there is places yet underneath our planet that are so fantastic. And one day, it is said, we will be introduced to this place. And as our friend, who now could not see with his normal eyes, but see, yet he did, began to realize that as he was getting closer to this source of energy, there came over him an inexpressible fear, the desire to go back to the surface. But alas, he knew he was too far to turn back. Now our friend had to convince our young man that this was true. Our friend was telling this young man of truths, knowledge, wisdom that was unfathomable. But as he crept to the precipice, and in one last desperate effort to think that he could free himself, which he was never in prison to begin with, he found out that even the heaviest of minerals, iron, had no force. And behold, he saw, which could only be described as something that, well, the mortal mind cannot comprehend. And alas, as our friend, the man who started it all, had told his story to our young lad friend, he began to tell him to consider the following: what seems to be is not, and that which seems to be not is. Facts are fallacies. Physical existence is a delusion surrounded by an illusion. Mortal bliss is impossible to be attained by mortal men, and no one person can ever be satisfied in this plane of existence. With these truths told, our friend bidded a farewell to his young protege, never to be seen again, never to be heard again. Now, I want to stop here before I end this to let you know that there are places in our earth now that we are finding that go deep. We're finding now that apparently there may be more to this hollow earth than we ever imagined. Maybe the ancestors were telling us something. Maybe, in fact, they had been there. Doubtful if any man can get as far as our friend did. But maybe not. We know this. Apparently, many, many others before us believed that this was the case. I wanted to show you before I leave. This is Kentucky. Do you see those western coal fields? The outer bluegrass? The whole area about Kentucky is that it is rife with caves. Mammoth Cave is so deep they still can't map it all. Yes. So remember this. There is yet so much more for our understanding. If you want a copy of this, just email me. I will give you the PDF. I can assure you it will be a journey you will enjoy.